In 1984, Bobby Joe Long murdered at least 10 women. In the years leading up to that, he'd raped 50, or was it 150? How could a man who left evidence behind everywhere he murdered be so hard to catch? And how did one 17-year-old girl blaze a path to the killer's doorstep? This is the story of serial killer Bobby Joe Long. Red fibers and red flags. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitch to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes. Bienvenue, bienvenue, bienvenue.
I was wondering what you were going to do.
It's for my French-speaking friends. And, of course, my accent is terrible, so don't start emailing and texting and say, you suck. But here's the problem. There's over 7,000 different languages in the world. So when we get to episode 7,000, I'm going to have to rethink this whole thing.
You'll have to go back to welcome.
Yeah, I have to go back to welcome.
I like how when you said, you suck, you did it exactly like our son. That's the way our son sounds when he says, you suck. That sucks.
So there you go.
Maybe that's how everybody says it.
Yeah.
Well, wherever you're listening today, be sure to like, rate, and review. Don't send us a review that says, you suck.
Yeah, exactly. This is a no-suck zone.
This is a no-suck zone today. I'm sorry. And also, I'm extremely hungry for some reason today. So if my stomach starts growling in the middle of this,
just blame it on me.
You'll know. You'll be able to hear it because it's my stomach is loud and angry today. Dieting's a killer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody out there who has to diet. It sucks. It's the worst. If you haven't joined the In-Laws and Outlaws, our closed Facebook group, we have a really good time in there. Go ahead and go join. It's getting nice and big in there. People are really starting to come in and
it's got traction.
Yeah, everybody's coming in and posting some really funny things, and we like those a lot. I am not going to waste any time today getting into this case.
Okay.
Bobby Joe Long. Before I get started, I want to thank some sources: Murderpedia, Wikipedia, allthat'sinteresting.com, the Tampa Tribune, and biography.com.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Bobby Joe Long is born on October 14th, 1953, in the tiny town of Canova, West Virginia, which proclaims itself the, quote, town of nice people, end quote.
Wow. A nice place to live.
It's a nice place to live. His parents are Luella and Joe Long, but Bobby Joe and his mama Luella moved from West Virginia to Miami, Florida when he's a baby, leaving Joe behind. And Luella was looking for a better life.
Okay.
I'm just going to tell you now, she really didn't find one.
Uh-oh.
His mother tended to be overly protective and dramatic, I read, but still Bobby Joe managed to suffer a series of severe head injuries beginning at the age of 5 when he was knocked unconscious in a fall from a swing and had one eyelid skewered by a stick.
Ooh, ouch.
And as I go through this, remember I said, he's got an overprotective mom.
Yeah,
okay?
she made him wear helmets when he played at the chess club.
No, she didn't. And then he should have.
Oh, okay.
In 1959, at 6, he was thrown from his bicycle, crashing headfirst into a parked car, with injuries including loss of several teeth and a severe concussion.
Good Lord.
Also at age 6, Bobby Joe is hit by a car as he's running across an icy street, but he's not severely injured.
Yeah, I guess compared to the other injuries.
Hang on.
Right.
In 1960, at age 7, he fell from a pony onto his head and remained dizzy and nauseous for several weeks.
Yeah, I'd keep this kid at home in a rubber room.
Lots of head injuries for a kid who has an overprotective mother, right?
Exactly.
An overprotective mom with whom he shares a bed.
I don't want to know. Go ahead.
Red flag, right? Red flag.
Warning.
In 1965, Bobby Joe and his mother moved to Hialeah, Florida. He also seemed to have gotten into countless fistfights with his classmates when he started school in Hialeah. Luella was working as a barmaid at Big Daddy's Lounge, where I read in one source that she went to work scantily clad and brought home random men. Bobby Joe didn't like school too much. He said he felt like an outsider. And on the days when Luella would let him skip because he just doesn't like school, she'd take him to the Hialeah race course parking lot and teach him how to drive.
And how old was he?
He's 12.
Well, there you go.
There are a couple of interesting things about Bobby Joe. I already told you he sleeps with his mom in the same bed. And he has something that's called Klinefelter's syndrome, which meant he had an extra female chromosome causing higher amounts of the female hormone estrogen to be in his system.
Okay.
He's got an extra X.
Okay.
When he hits puberty, he starts to grow breasts.
Oh.
And he didn't deal with this very well, as you might imagine, and the kids teased him, as you might imagine. He would eventually have breast reduction surgery as a teen.
Wow.
So that's got to scar him a little bit.
That's going to mess with you a little bit.
Yeah, not to mention the fact you're sleeping in your mom's bed. Bobby Joe doesn't have many friends until he meets a neighbor girl, Cynthia Jean Guthrie. She lives just a few blocks over and is being raised by her aunt. It's 1966, and according to Luella, after Bobby Joe and Cindy meet, they were together constantly.
Okay.
And it's at this point, and at the age of 13, that Bobby Joe wants to sleep in his own room. He got himself a girlfriend. He wants to sleep in his own room. Go figure.
Yep.
In 1970, when he's 17, Bobby Joe is arrested for the first time for theft, but the charges are dropped. In 1971, and by the time Bobby Joe reaches the age of 18, he drops out of high school and finds work as an apprentice electrician. And I read where he started and stopped high school like 3 times, and I also read that he only made it to the 10th grade. But I think what I gathered from that was that I think cumulatively, he probably had a 10th grade education. It's also at this time and at the age of 18 that Bobby Joe enlists in the U.S. Army, and he marries Cindy. They've been together for 6 years now, since the age of 12. But I wrote in the margin, don't you have to be a high school graduate to join the Army? At least have a GED? Maybe not in 1971. And I guess they didn't really have a good way to check everything. No electronic records.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Bobby Joe is stationed at Homestead Air Force Base, Florida, and things went well until 1974 when he had a serious motorcycle accident where he suffered another head injury and came close to losing a leg.
Wow.
And Bobby Joe says that after this accident, he became hypersexual. While in the hospital, he began to have unpredictable and violent outbursts and developed an escalating obsession with sex. Even while in a body cast, Bobby Joe managed to masturbate 5 times a day while recovering in an attempt to relieve himself.
Wow.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Dude. What's that Viagra commercial? If it lasts more than 4 hours, call a doctor.
Yeah.
And the comedian's like,
I'm calling everybody.
I'm calling all my buddies.
If I have an erection that lasts more than 5 hours, I'm calling everybody. Bobby Joe's growing and desperate sexual needs began to consume him. After his release from the hospital, he had lots of time now that he's unemployed and discharged from the Army, and the wheels are turning in Bobby Joe's hypersexual head. And at this point, Bobby Joe is 21, and he's a father. He and Cindy had a son, and 1 year later, they will have a daughter.
Okay.
In 1977, Bobby Joe switches careers from electrician and studies to become an X-ray technician. And all I could think of when I read that was, dude, electricians make a ton of money.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that an X-ray technician doesn't make a lot of money.
Right.
But if you're wiring a whole house
Oh, yeah.
I just think electricians do well. I think that's it's an amazing trade that not enough people go into.
Yeah, electricians and plumbers. We just had a plumber.
We just had a plumber in our house not an hour ago.
And the check I wrote, I went, wow.
It should have been a plumber.
Well, what am I doing?
But in 1977, he's switching careers from electrician to X-ray technician.
Okay.
And Bobby Joe's violent outbursts are really a thing. And he once choked Cynthia unconscious and slammed her head against a television.
Wow.
And according to Cindy, quote, when I came to, I was on the couch. Of course, he was there crying. I'll never do it again. I'm so sorry. Then the next words were, when you drive yourself to get stitches, if you tell them what really happened, I'll kill you when you get home. Red flag. Red flag.
That's love right there.
Cindy divorces Bobby Joe.
You think?
I'm not going to talk about his poor family anymore, just to say that families can't help it if their husband or wife or father or mother turn out to be a killer, and I want to respect that.
Right.
There's not a whole lot about Cindy. There's not a whole lot about his children.
Yeah.
Yeah. In 1980, freewheeling and single, Bobby Joe moves to Tampa, Florida, and takes a series of odd jobs, also working for Centro Asturiano Hospital.
Wow. Say that 10 times fast.
I think I had to say it 10 times.
Yeah.
But that's not all he's doing. He's answering classified ads for things he's not even interested in.
Like what?
Red flag. I'm just going to keep saying red flag. Here's what he's doing. Bobby Joe is raping innocent women all over Fort Lauderdale, Ocala, Miami, and Dade County. Bobby Joe starts answering classified ads for small appliances and other things. If he finds a woman alone at home, he would rape her. This is going to go on from 1981 to 1983.
And they never caught him?
No. Bobby Joe terrorized the Florida communities as the, quote, classified ad rapist, end quote. He would prey on housewives during midday attacks, dropping by while the husbands were at work. Bobby Joe typically produced a knife, bound his victims, raped them violently, and robbed their homes before he fled.
Did any of them give him a description or anything like that?
I don't know. I don't even think he wore a mask.
Yeah.
No.
Wow. And they couldn't catch him.
Between 50 and 150 women he does this to.
And no one
over
gave
his
a
lifetime.
description.
And no one apparently had a description of him.
Wow.
November 18th, 1981, Bobby Joe is charged in Tampa, Florida with sending nude photographs to the 12-year-old daughter of a doctor.
What?
He sent an obscene letter and photograph to a 12-year-old girl. Red flag.
Yeah, you think?
Officials had traced phone calls Bobby Joe had made to the girl. He's picked up and jailed for 2 days, and then he pled no contest. He's sentenced to time served, 6 months probation, and is ordered to pay $66.50 in fines and court costs. And this is going to happen a lot. He's right in the hands of authorities, and then he's let go, even though there are red flags. That's why I called this case Red Fibers, Red Flags.
Right.
In October 1981, Sharon Richards, who shared a house with Bobby Joe, accused him of rape, but the police didn't have enough evidence to make a charge. Just 2 weeks later, Bobby Joe hit Sharon during an argument. He then takes his leave from Tampa, Florida. He's like, I'm out. I'm eating out.
Eating out.
January 1982, at the age of 28, Bobby Joe heads out to California where he's taking a commercial driving course. He lives in Long Beach on the 2500 block of Eucalyptus Avenue where he rents a room from a woman named Kathy. Now, I also read that he attended the College of Oceaneering in Wilmington, California. He takes a 6-month, $9,000 commercial diving course, but because of poor grades, he won't finish until September of 1982.
Yeah, that's one course you don't want to fail in.
I mean, I'm PADI certified to scuba dive, but when I was learning how to do the calculations, you know, how many dives I could do and in a day, my dive instructor walked up behind me as I was like doing my calculations and he went, Chris, you're dead. Start over, honey. You're dead.
I'm only dog paddle certified.
It's a whole other world down there.
Yeah.
But while taking his underwater welding class, he also dated a 17-year-old girl who lived across the street from his rented room. Red flag.
Yeah.
And he's back to his old ways. Bobby Joe began contacting women through the Penny Saver and other classified ads while he was in California. And when he found a woman alone, he asked to use the bathroom, took out his rape kit, and brutally raped and robbed the women. And these crimes will never be prosecuted by the local California authorities because they never know it's Bobby Joe.
I can't get over that. I don't understand.
Then in 1983, Bobby Joe goes home to live with his parents in West Virginia. And by this time, it seems from everything that I read that Luella was now back to living in West Virginia, where Bobby Joe's dad has never left. On May 16, 1983, Bobby Joe starts work as a radiology technician at the Huntington Hospital. But on his fourth week in, he's fired on June 20th, 1983, for making female patients take off their clothes unnecessarily for the x-rays that he's taking.
Oh, wow.
Red flag.
Yeah.
Say it with me, everybody. Red flag.
Red flag.
He went quietly, and he returned to Tampa.
Okay.
By July 6th, he's got a $7 an hour job working weekends as an x-ray tech at Humana Brandon Hospital.
Okay.
In July of 1983, Bobby Joe meets Emma at the Humana Hospital. She was a nurse, and they soon become a couple.
Okay.
Emma encouraged him to attend church. He, in turn, gave her jewelry that, unbeknownst to Emma, was the stolen property of his rape victims.
Wow.
She never questioned him about how he was able to afford these expensive gifts.
Yeah.
But then in September of 1983, he's found guilty on the assault charges stemming from the 1981 rape of Sharon Richards, his old roommate.
Okay.
And this enraged Bobby Joe, and he wrote numerous letters to the judge demanding a new trial. He claimed that he'd done nothing criminal and that the whole incident had been Richards' fault. He gets 6 months probation, 30 days in jail, and 50 hours of community service. No one is holding this man accountable for anything.
He's going, that's it? That's all? Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In early 1984, Bobby Joe got his retrial in the Sharon Richards case and was acquitted of the assault charges, despite the testimony of a number of witnesses against him. And as he left the courtroom, he turned to Sharon and laughed.
Wow.
Red flag.
Yeah, he's got big cojones.
March 6, 1984, a woman who had advertised her home near Port Richey in Pasco County for sale, she's raped, and it'll be years before her property is found in Bobby Joe's apartment, linking him to the crime. Then by March 1984, Bobby Joe leaves his job at Humana Brandon Hospital. After 9 months, Bobby Joe, in an employment application, will say that he left because there was no chance of advancement and the work was too exhausting. On April 3rd, 1984, Bobby Joe applies for a job as an x-ray technician at Tampa General Hospital.
He's got like all these different little career jobs that he can just bounce back and forth.
Yeah. Well, he's an electrician.
Yeah.
I think he likes the x-ray technician job because he can take people's clothes off.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
he thinks he can take people's clothes off.
Yeah.
You can see whatever you need to see through a hospital gown.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2 days later, on April 5th, a woman is abducted at about 11:30 p.m. at a Carrollwood shopping center parking lot after a man talks her into giving him a ride because he was admiring her vintage Jaguar. Mm-hmm.
As Daryl Hall would say.
He is saying, what a beautiful Jaguar. Might I have a ride?
Wow.
And she says, sure, hop in. I'll take you for a ride.
Yeah, big mistake.
During the car ride, he pulls a gun. She wrecks the car to escape. She wrecks her vintage Jaguar.
Yeah, I think I would too.
Bobby Joe is arrested just before midnight and charged with aggravated assault. He'll get 3 years probation for this.
He's got a rap sheet and they're just
letting him go and letting him go and letting him go, including like sending nude photographs to
a 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then in April 1984, Bobby Joe's relationship with Emma ends. Maybe Emma's had enough.
You think? Yeah.
His mother will say that, quote, it really broke him up, end quote.
Whatever. Yeah. Whatever.
Wah, 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 wah. And maybe this is what really takes Bobby Joe over the edge, because now he's not only a serial rapist, he's going to become a serial killer. March 27th, 1984, 20-year-old artist Ann Wick was an Indiana girl. She'd hitchhiked all the way from Gas City, Indiana to Tampa. Bobby Joe rapes and strangles her to death. She won't be found for months. Even though she is his first murder, she is the last girl to be found.
Wow.
First one killed, last one found. Born on May 23rd in 1963, artist Ann Wick was a sex worker, and she was engaged to be married at the time of her death.
Okay.
2 months later, Nguyen Tai Long is born on November 1st, 1964 in Laos. She goes by the name Lana, or sometimes Peggy. Lana lived in California before moving to Tampa, Florida in 1983. Lana is 20 years old. She'd been working at a Tampa nightclub, the Sly Fox, as an exotic dancer on Nebraska Avenue, but quit her job to study art and cinema at the University of South Florida. On May 10th, 1984, she will be seen for the last time at the apartment complex where she lived. I also read that she was last seen at a bar called Cece's that night as well.
Okay.
3 days later, May 13th, 1984, a couple of teenage boys walking in the early evening across a field near I-75 just southeast of Tampa, Florida, they notice a bad smell in the air. They go closer and realize that the blackened thing in the weeds they were looking at was not a deer or a cow, but the mangled remains of a nude woman.
Wow.
And they run off and find their parents. It's Lana's body. She had been there for 3 days. She was infested with maggots, especially around the face, which made identification really hard. She was found face down, her wrists tied together loosely behind her back around 8 inches apart, and a noose draped 3 times around her neck. It appeared to have been used as a leash with a hangman's slip knot.
Wow.
The Florida sun and all the insects had done a lot of damage to her body.
Yeah, 3 days is a long time in there.
In Florida in May?
Yeah.
She suffered severe bruising, and that just proved that prior to her death, she had been severely beaten. Oddly, the rope tying her wrists was different than the rope around her neck, and a white silk cloth was found under her face, and they think it was used as a gag. And there was more. Her hips had been broken to allow both of her legs to be pulled really far apart at right angles from her body.
Good grief.
It's for shock value.
Wow.
Lana had also been raped. At the scene, investigators soon found a set of tire tracks that led into and out of the field where she was dumped. They cast plaster tire impressions and noted that the front and right tires had a standard tread design, while the left rear tire had an unusual tread design. And Captain Terry of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department contacted Special Agent Michael P. Malone, a fiber analyst at the FBI's lab, who agreed to examine all the evidence, and Malone found a red trilobal nylon fiber on the white scarf and concluded that it was probably from a type of cheap carpeting inside the car, perhaps the car that had transported the body of Lana Long to the dump site. That's called foreshadowing.
Dun, dun, dun.
This murder did not get any press. It was buried. I found it buried on page 9B of the Tampa Tribune.
Why was it buried?
She had been a sex worker. She had been an exotic dancer at the Sly Fox.
Wow.
You know, I think maybe someone thought she was disposable, a disposable person.
Yeah.
No one is disposable. A missing persons report on a young Asian female appeared to match Lana's physical features. And there's no DNA at this time, but her fingerprints were utilized, and it positively identified her as Nguyen Tai Long, also known as Lana Long.
Okay.
Investigators discovered that she was a drug addict, but she had also been trying to raise money to return to her family in California. Lana didn't have a car, and she often looked for rides. Her boyfriend was briefly a suspect, but his alibi checked out. May 26th, 1984. Michelle Denise Sims is a 22-year-old girl who just moved to Tampa from Fort Pierce, where she worked as a receptionist in a massage parlor. Born in San Bernardino County, California, Michelle had been a beauty contestant. Michelle was also a cocaine addict and had become a sex worker to fuel her drug habit. Michelle had only been in the city for 2 days. She was last seen talking to 2 white men near Kennedy Boulevard. A construction worker will find her body a day later on May 27th, 1984, in a lover's lane near Plant City, north of I-4 in Hillsborough County. Officials from Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department arrive to examine the scene, and they soon realize this really looks familiar. The mostly nude woman was on her back. She was clad in a green T-shirt, which had been ripped up the front and pulled back, leaving her arms in the sleeves to bind them. Her wrists had been tied behind her back, loosely, and once again a rope had been wound 3 times around her neck. Like the crime 2 weeks earlier, the ropes used to bind her and to strangle her were 2 different types. The leash-like rope around her neck had been partially cut by a knife, possibly with the same weapon used to cut her throat. She also had massive blunt force trauma over her left ear, and Michelle had been raped. So she was raped, stabbed, strangled, and beaten before her throat was slashed.
Jeez.
Now, while this victim, Michelle, wore next to nothing, a blood-stained white jumper and white pantyhose were found hanging from a tree limb and were assumed to have been hers. And on Michelle's body was a red fiber lying near her left breast, as well as several strands of hair on her stomach and under her right hand. These would be analyzed along with whatever was under Michelle's fingernails. Prints were found at the scene, tire tracks, and even a bare footprint was found in the mud.
Okay.
Plaster casts were made of all of these impressions, one of which contained a clear V along with more indistinct letters. Now, this time they had found the victim more quickly, and Michelle had only been dead for about 12 hours. But there are clear similarities between Michelle and Lana's murders. There were good matches between the impressions from both scenes, so the casts were sent to an expert in Ohio, and the right rear tire was a Goodyear Viva, while the left rear was a Vogue tire, an expensive tire that is exclusive to Cadillacs. And let's not forget the red fiber found on both bodies.
Right.
They also found a second type of red fiber in the Sims case, a delustered red trilobal fiber, which indicated that the car probably contained 2 different types of carpet fibers. So basically, when I looked this up, a trilobal fiber, it just means that it's 3 strands that are wound around each other.
Right.
It's polyester. It's used in lots of stuff like the carpet mats of your car.
It's like a braid.
Yeah, it's like a braid. And if you've got a red interior, it's not just one color red. It's like a mix of 2 different colors inside the car on the car mat.
Okay.
One more important clue emerged. Semen stains found on Michelle's clothing indicated that the killer had an AB blood type, and the hairs found on Michelle were 8 inches long, brown, and cranial, and they were identified as Caucasian, and they did not belong to her. Now, since the FBI is already involved in the fiber analysis, it was just a short step to get the behavioral science unit interested in the possibility of getting in on a serial killer case before it escalated.
Okay.
I've written about the behavioral science unit in my books, and this is quite the department. But the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department puts together the common factors from the crime scenes, and the agents worked up a profile of the killer's probable background and personality traits. So here's what they're thinking. The killer was mobile and probably had either his own vehicle or was borrowing the same vehicle. The leash-like ropes around the necks and the brutal beatings that exceeded what was necessary to kill them showed a certain deviance. It seemed more likely that the victims had been randomly selected because they were easy prey and not known to the killer.
Okay.
So it's just somebody that he sees on the street.
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity to kill.
Yeah.
It's not somebody that he knows.
Right.
He was deemed to be a white male in his mid-20s, gregarious, which means he likes to talk a lot, extroverted, and manipulative. In general, he seemed to be what they'd classify as organized.
Okay.
He would be intelligent but have issues with authority. He probably had difficulty holding down a job and would have had multiple short-term employments.
Wow.
And on the issue of relationships and in the tradition of organized killers, he probably would have had a woman in his life. He would date regularly but not have a long-term commitment. He would brag about his sexual exploits and probably date younger women.
Wow.
So they're pretty daggone close.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's amazing that they can just kind of nail in.
Yeah. It was also likely that he would have a prison record or some sort of record of problems with the law. Yes, he does.
Yeah.
There's so many red flags. He was sadistic. He probably used some scheme to lure the women into his car and then proceeded to torture them mentally and physically, keeping them alive for some period of time. And so this is great. They have a profile of him. But while they're putting all of this together, Bobby Joe is raping and killing again.
Yeah.
May 29th, 1984, 2 days after Michelle Sims' body is found, a woman is raped at knife point in her Palm Harbor home in northern Pinellas County after letting a man inside her home who was answering a classified ad. Later, items from this home will be found in Bobby Joe's apartment.
Oops.
On June 1st, 1984, Sheriff Walter Heinrich calls a press conference and says that the police have found similarities in the murders of Lana Long and Michelle Sims, and police officials caution that a killer of young women may be operating in Tampa, Florida.
But they're closing in.
They're saying to everybody, hey,
Yeah.
don't get in somebody's car.
Right.
Something hinky is happening here. We're giving you a heads up. Be careful. Keep your head on a swivel.
Right. And this is 1984 because people were still hitchhiking and, you know.
Yeah, we were a little more cautious.
We
I mean,
were.
84, that's like, 84, 80, 88,
No, I know.
90. That was my prime.
I know.
Woo!
But
That was when Chris was out whooping it up.
but they still weren't as cautious as we are now.
No.
Yeah.
No, because bad things happened, but nothing bad happened to anybody that you really knew.
Sure.
If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
June 8, 1984. Elizabeth Louderback is a 22-year-old shy girl who worked as a solderer at a manufacturing plant in Odessa. She worked on an assembly line.
Right.
Elizabeth lived with her parents and younger siblings at the Village Tampa Community Mobile Home Park, just a few blocks from the Nebraska Avenue Strip where many sex workers would work. The Sly Fox, where Lana Long was an exotic dancer,
Right.
on Nebraska Avenue.
Ah.
Elizabeth had gone for a walk from the mobile home park where she lived, but she never returned, and her mother reported her as missing. A week later, on June 14th, Bobby Joe gets a job at Tampa General Hospital. He's a $7.50 an hour x-ray technician working 10 hours each day, Thursday through Sunday.
Okay.
Because he's got to have time to rape and kill. So he's only working long weekends. Sunday morning, June 24th, 1984, Elizabeth Loudenbach's body is found in an orange grove, severely decomposed. Unlike the earlier two victims, she was fully clothed, but she had been raped and strangled. And since there were no ropes at this scene and no interstate nearby, she's not immediately linked to the serial killer that the police and FBI are actively looking for.
Right.
She was also not a prostitute. She wasn't a drug addict. She wasn't a hitchhiker. She wasn't a dancer. She didn't fit any of the things that they thought the serial killer was after.
Sure.
She was considered merely the victim of a random murderer or possibly a copycat to the others.
Okay.
In the beginning, Elizabeth's boyfriend was a suspect, and here's why. He failed his polygraph test.
Wow.
But there was evidence left on her body at the scene for police to know it wasn't him, including red carpet fibers that were collected. But police aren't putting two and two together, and here's what happened. When the evidence arrived at the FBI lab, it was not assigned to the same examiner who had looked at the first two brown strands of hair and red carpet fibers. And I read where it's extremely important, as you might imagine, for the same crime scene technician and the same forensic examiners at the lab to work the case the same.
Yeah.
So when these things came in, it just got lost. It didn't go to them.
So what happened to this guy with the polygraph? I mean, here's the thing. If I had to take a polygraph and I was totally innocent, I still think I'm going to fail this thing.
Because you're so nervous?
Yeah, I mean, I get nervous when they take my blood pressure. I'm like, okay, don't let your heart rate get up. Don't let your heart rate get up. Oh my God, my heart rate's getting up.
The doctor's going to tell me I need to take blood pressure medication.
Yeah, the minute that cuff goes on.
Deep breaths, deep breaths. No, I mean, in 1984, it's a lot more sophisticated now than it was in 1984. But they couldn't link him because the evidence on her body, it didn't match his DNA. It wasn't him. It didn't match his fingerprints. It didn't match any of his stuff. What it matched was a serial killer, but it got lost in the shuffle.
Right.
July 17th, 1984. After a plea bargain, Bobby Joe is sentenced for the April abduction of the woman in the Jaguar, and he's given 3 years probation and is ordered to pay $1,500 in restitution.
Good grief.
Red flag.
Good Lord.
Then Bobby Joe takes a break until September of 1984. So from July to September, he takes the summer off. September 7th, Vicki Marie Elliott. She's 21 years old and is walking to her job waitressing at the Ramada Inn near the intersection of North Nebraska Avenue. She actually waited tables overnight at the hotel's coffee shop. She'd purchased a plane ticket to go home to Muskegon, Michigan, and when she got back to Michigan, she wanted to study to become a paramedic. Vicki had asked a neighbor for a ride to work, but by the time the neighbor showed up and knocked on her door, Vicki was gone. That same month, September 27th, Bobby Joe loses his job at Tampa General because he doesn't have the advanced certification that he needs for the job that he applied for.
Right.
And now he's just got loads of time on his hands.
Which isn't good.
3 days later, on September 30th, 1984, Chanel Devin Williams, an 18-year-old who had moved to Tampa from Winter Haven in August, is last seen walking on the Nebraska Avenue Strip. She was born on March 26, 1966. Chanel had just earned her GED. 1 week later, on October 7th, 1984, Chanel's body is found by a ranch hand on a cattle ranch north of Hillsborough State Farm. Her body had been shoved under a barbed wire fence and was lying face down. Her clothing had been scattered. Her panties were on the fence. Her bra was on the gate. Chanel had been raped and strangled and then killed with a gunshot to the back of her head, which was a different method from the others. She was identified by her fingerprints, and the FBI found both types of red carpet fibers on her clothing.
It almost sounds like, too, I mean, the way that he's got, her bra and her panties splayed out on the fence. And so it's almost like he's displaying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, he is. He wants the shock factor.
Yeah.
He displays their bodies very vulgar, in a very vulgar way, I should say. Sick. Yeah, for the shock value of it.
Sick.
A week later, on October 14th, a fifth body was discovered in northeastern Hillsborough County. Her name is Karen Beth Dinsfriend. She's 28 years old and grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida, a place that Rob and I love to go to. We love St. Pete.
Yep.
She had a history of drug abuse and was working as a sex worker. Her wrists were bound with a red bandana, and her legs and neck had been tied with a long, thick shoelace. She'd been beaten about the head and raped. Her yellow sweatshirt was pulled up to her neck, exposing a bruised and bloody torso, with indicators that she had been dragged. She was wearing only the sweatshirt, although the rest of what happened to be her clothing was scattered nearby. The cause of death was strangulation. And because she was a known sex worker and drug addict, the investigation team actually recognized her. And to link her with the other victims, both types of the red carpet fibers were found on her clothes.
Wow.
There were also browned Caucasian pubic hairs and semen. He's leaving himself everywhere.
And what year was DNA prevalent?
So DNA testing started actually in 1984. But it was not used in criminal investigations until 1986, 2 years later.
So that's why you've got some samples here, but...
We've got stuff, but right. 2 days later, on October 16th, 1984, the Hillsborough Sheriff's Office has another press conference expressing, quote, concern of a possible pattern, end quote, you think, in 3 or 4 murders, and alerting the public. It is said that day that the murders of Lana, Michelle, and Karen are all definitely linked, and Chanel, well, she was probably linked to the same man as well. Around this same time, 22-year-old Kimberly Kyle Hops, also known as Sugar. She's 22. She's last seen walking with a group of sex workers near Nebraska Avenue. 2 weeks later, on October 31st, Halloween, a 71-year-old man clearing a ditch next to US 301 on the northern edge of Hillsborough County finds her body. She'd been raped and strangled with a black cloth choker that she wore around her neck. Authorities tried to identify her, but they won't know who she is until later when Bobby Joe confesses to killing her.
Wow.
Late October, Virginia Lee Johnson is a Connecticut-born 18-year-old who'd been in and out of Florida for the past few years. She vanished from the Nebraska Avenue area between Fowler and Fletcher. And then, November 3rd, 1984, 2:50 a.m., 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh is bicycling home from her night job at a North Florida Avenue donut shop. She worked at Krispy Kreme. I love Krispy Kreme
I knew
donuts.
That was coming, especially when they're warm.
I love Krispy Kreme donuts. I have celiac disease. I can no longer eat Krispy Kreme donuts, but Rob knows this. I would let myself have 2 Krispy Kreme donuts on my birthday every single year, up until the point I found out that I couldn't eat wheat anymore.
Right.
I love Krispy Kremes.
Yeah, and when you and I first started dating, I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that is the home of Krispy Kreme donuts.
I'm telling you, Krispy Kreme had to come from the South, y'all. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
When that little sign is on that says they're warm.
Yeah. A little slice of heaven.
But she works at Krispy Kreme. Lisa McVeigh works at Krispy Kreme. And while on her way home from work during the evening of November 3rd, Lisa was grabbed off her bicycle and tied up by someone hiding in the bushes along the road. He had a gun, and he said that he also had a knife. He quickly blindfolded her and forced her into his car. She was certain that he meant to kill her. She begged him not to hurt her and said that she would do whatever he wanted. He ordered her to remove her clothes in his car and to perform oral sex on him. He drove her around for a while and eventually brought her back to his apartment where he kept her hostage. For 26 hours, he repeatedly raped her, fondled her, forced her to perform sex acts on him, and even made her shower with him. He told her over and over that he did not want to hurt her. And even though she's 17, and even though she's being held hostage and being repeatedly raped, Lisa managed to keep her head clear. And at one point, her kidnapper stopped at an automatic teller machine to get some cash, so she peered out from underneath the blindfold at the dashboard and memorized what she could of the car's interior.
Oh, wow.
She continued to get quick glimpses as they arrived at a white stucco building and went up some red steps. And although the man insisted that she keep her eyes shut as he abused her, she managed to get a look at her surroundings. She also dropped a hair barrette next to the bed, unnoticed, to prove that she had been there.
Yeah.
She's 17.
Good for her.
Now, after a marathon rape session, he dozes off. And when he wakes up, he said that he now trusted her. And she sensed that when they talked, he relaxed and was less brutal with her. She told him how she had suffered at the hands of her grandmother's boyfriend, who had raped her repeatedly with a gun to her head. This is all true, too.
Wow.
He stopped referring to her as bitch and started calling her babe. He even said he wished he could keep her. She had no idea what he intended to do to her, but she found ways to keep him from getting angry. Then he seemed to lose interest. He took her back into his car, and now she knew she was about to find out if she was going to live or die.
Right.
And to her surprise, he stopped the car and told her to get out, and he let her go, saying to her, quote, "Take care," end quote.
Wow. Did he want to get caught? Is that what's going on?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, maybe.
Okay.
Because he's going to talk about this a little bit later.
Okay.
But Lisa wastes no time in getting home. She wakes her dad. She tells him what happened. He calls the police. The investigators working the serial killer case don't know it, but this is their big break. This brilliant 17-year-old girl is their big break.
Right.
She described her kidnapper as a white male in his mid-30s. He had a deep voice. His hair was brown, about an inch long, in a layered cut. He had thin eyebrows and a short mustache, big nose, small ears, good teeth. He was compact but slightly overweight and come across as somewhat feminine. There's that extra X.
Yep.
She noted the gun and went on to describe the car, the dark red or maroon two-door Dodge Magnum with a red steering wheel and dashboard and white seats and interiors.
And what color was the carpet?
She did not remember anything about the carpet.
Oh.
She also recalled details about the apartment where she'd been raped and tried to give the officers a hint about its location, as well as the location of the bank where they had stopped. But the blindfold had limited how much she was able to see and how much she could really tell them.
Right.
But for the love of Jesus, she is giving them so much information.
Yeah, especially since they haven't had any.
And she's 17.
Yeah.
She is 17.
They need to hire her.
That's called foreshadowing.
Oh, here we go. Bring it on.
They send the rape evidence to the FBI lab to see if there's a connection to the serial murders. Red fibers are found on her underpants. By the way, Lisa has written a book called Smoldering Embers, which recounts her horrible abduction and rape. I will have a link to it in the show notes. I did not read it. I did not use it as a source, but I will share a link to it.
Okay.
2 days later, on November 6, 1984, in Pasco County, the next county over from Hillsborough, a woman out horseback riding on her ranch comes across body parts that had been severed and scattered throughout the field. The medical examiner of Pasco County determined that the victim had been dead and dumped there for about 2 weeks. And although the bones have been gnawed on by animals, Dr. Woods could still determine that the girl had died a violent death. There was a 9-inch cord tied twice around her neck over a piece of cloth, and I think a shoelace was binding her wrists together. There were no bullets or bullet wounds, so the cause of death was deemed a strangulation, and despite the dismemberment, there were many similarities to the other murders. This was 18-year-old Virginia Lee Johnson. 5 days later, on November 10th, 21-year-old Kim Marie Swan goes missing. Kim willingly got into Bobby Joe's car. She fought him, so he strangled her and then drove around with her corpse in the front seat. He even stopped for gas with her body sitting in the front seat, but nobody noticed that she was dead.
Wow.
Then he took her out into the countryside and dumped her. She had just enrolled in vocational school. She had a son named Robbie. Her friend said she wanted to change her life because she had worked briefly as a dancer at the Sly Fox, the same club that Lana Long worked at. The thing that ties it all together is Nebraska Avenue.
Right.
It's a section, it's a strip where, that's where the Sly Fox is located.
Right.
There are sex workers there. There are people who are willing to turn tricks because they're drug addicts.
It's sort of his little buffet.
It's easy. It's where the weak impalas of the herd are hanging out, and that's what he goes for. The next day, November 12th, 1984, a sign painter in Tampa came across Kim's body. The Tampa police called in the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office to take a look at the murder scene. This victim wore the leash-like noose around her neck and had rope burns on her body. Her face was severely beaten and her legs were forced open for a shocking display. Her clothing had been thrown near her and fecal matter lay on the shirt.
What?
Yeah.
Gross.
The cause of death was strangulation. Inside her jeans was her driver's license. Also, like most of the previous victims linked in this series, on her jeans they found small particles of red carpet fiber and brown hair.
Wow.
Once again, this dude is leaving his DNA. He's leaving evidence everywhere.
But they weren't using DNA research yet.
They weren't, but these carpet fibers all match.
Yeah.
It's the same guy.
Right, right.
The police worked this case hard, given all the bodies they had within a short period of time, but no leads are panning out, and they are desperate to find a suspect. 2 days after they find Kim's body, on November 14th, 1984, another press conference is held, and this time a special task force inside the Hillsborough Sheriff's Office tells the public that they have been working closely with the FBI and the murders of Lana Long, Michelle Sims, Chanel Williams, Karen Dinsfriend, that they're all linked. So they're coming clean.
Right.
So they've already said, we think that these are linked.
Right.
Now they're coming out and saying, look we're working with the FBI.
Right.
We're not just trying to handle this at the local level. We've called in the big guns.
Right.
So this task force has been formed, and their first meeting takes place on November 14th, 1984. And all the cooperating homicide and sex crime detectives, they learn all at the same time that the FBI lab has processed the evidence that they got from the Lisa McVeigh case, the 17-year-old girl, and that they had found the same red fibers in all the other serial murder cases. And now they have good information, including a description of him and his car and his apartment and where he banks.
Mm-hmm.
And the profile that they had come up with, as we already discussed, it's pretty daggone close.
Right.
But more importantly, the place where Lisa had been released, where he let her out of the car, that gave police and authorities a really good sense of where he might drive up and down the street, like where he frequents, where he's usually driving.
Yep.
And they know what kind of car it is.
Right.
On November 5th, 1984, detectives were on cruise patrol in Tampa when they see a red Dodge Magnum.
Uh-oh.
They pull the car over. Just need your license and registration. The man's name was Robert Joe Long, better known as Bobby Joe. And his address matched the area that the police are searching for the killer's apartment. And the car's interior also matched what Lisa McVeigh had described.
And what color was the carpet?
Red.
There you go. That's what I'm waiting on.
They approach him and they tell him that they're looking for a robbery suspect. So Bobby Joe cooperates and lets the police photograph him. He was visibly relieved when they let him go. Now, they had all this information for leads, and the task force checked the bank transactions and found that Bobby Joe had made a withdrawal at precisely the time that Lisa McVeigh said her abductor had gone to the ATM.
Right.
And that's significant. Then they looked at Bobby Joe's criminal record and found that he was currently on probation for an aggravated assault. And the FBI profile had indicated that the killer they were looking for could have an arrest record. This guy's arrest record.
He's got a rap sheet a mile long.
His record for masturbating in one day is no match for his arrest record. There. I said what I said.
The truth hurts.
The truth hurts. They put surveillance teams on him and they tapped his phone. Then they got a search warrant for his car and an arrest warrant on the charges of kidnapping and sexual battery. And in preparation to take him down, they put together 4 teams.
Wow.
An arrest and a security transport team, a vehicular seizure and search team, a residence search team, and a neighborhood survey team to interview Bobby Joe's neighbors.
It's another scene out of the Blues Brothers.
I mean, they're coming for him. But it's about time. It's about damn time.
Yeah.
As Lizzo would say, it's about damn time. A swarm of cops grab him as he comes out of a movie theater, and they place him under arrest, and then the other teams go into action. They just start sifting through everything that Bobby Joe owns.
Sure.
Once they had Bobby Joe's car, they remove a sample of the right floor carpet, send it to the FBI for comparison.
It's a match.
It's a match. They disassemble the car's interior, and then they check for fibers from the victim's clothing or from rope or victim's fingerprints, blood, anything else, any other physical evidence. Bobby Joe's apartment looked just like Lisa had described it, and detectives even find her hair barrette
Good
that
girl.
she left behind. And they've got plenty of photos of nude women, including photos that Bobby Joe had taken of himself raping some of his victims.
Wow.
They also located pieces of female clothing. And Bobby Joe signed a consent to interview form and was interrogated, where he admitted to kidnapping Lisa McVeigh and to having sex with her many times. Yet he added that at one point, Lisa said she did not want to leave him. And he claimed that he had unloaded the gun and put the bullets in the trash so he would not be tempted to hurt her.
Wow.
About the blindfold that Lisa wore, well, Bobby Joe said that he had fashioned it himself 2 days before the abduction, just in case. He said he did not use drugs, he rarely drank, and he did not suffer from memory losses, even though he's hit his head about a million times.
Exactly.
The interrogators then brought up the subject of physical evidence, and they tell Bobby Joe all the evidence that can be gathered at a crime scene. And they show him photos of the 5 known murder victims, asking him, do you know these women? And Bobby Joe says,
No.
no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No. But then he excuses himself. He asks to go to the bathroom. And when he comes back, they again start talking about this physical evidence, specifically the left rear Vogue tire on the tire tread impressions. And Bobby Joe said the light bulb goes on. He's good, and he responds with, quote, "I think I might need an attorney," end quote.
You think, Bobby?
Before they leave the interrogation room, the sergeant detective says, and I'm paraphrasing, "Look at Bobby Joe. It's time to get right with Jesus because we already have a case against you because of all the physical evidence."
Right.
And Bobby Joe smiled and said, quote, "Well, I guess you got me good. Yes, I killed them. All the ones in the paper. I did them all," end quote.
Wow.
He was asked to describe each case, and he did, with details. He realized that he had set himself up when he had not killed 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh. Quote, "I knew when I let her go that it would only be a matter of time. I didn't even tell her not to talk to the police or anything. I just didn't care anymore. I wanted to stop. I was sick inside," end quote.
Wow.
So you were saying maybe he wanted to get caught.
Yeah.
And he says, "I just didn't care anymore. I wanted to stop. I was sick inside."
Wow.
Bobby Joe suffered from, quote, "blinding headaches and driving obsessions with sex, as well as the ability to have sex repeatedly." As Long confessed that day, he described how he had invited Lana Long into his car because she needed a ride. With Michelle Sims, he had hit her over the head after he couldn't strangle her because he didn't want her to suffer when he stabbed her. Next, he described the killing of Elizabeth Loudenback, who he said he had considered letting go until she, quote, "jerked me around," end quote. He had strangled her with a rope and then took her purse and used her bank card before throwing it away. He described the killing of Chanel Williams and claimed that the gun he used to kill her was the same gun with which he had kidnapped Lisa McVeigh, and also the gun used in the earlier conviction of aggravated assault. He described the murder of Karen Dinsfriend, in which he had started to strangle her in one orange grove, but heard dogs barking, so he put her in the trunk and moved to another orange grove where he finished the job. He spoke of the murder of Sugar, later identified as Kimberly Hoops, who he left in a ditch. Bobby Joe described the murder of the girl whose remains had been found scattered in a field. He didn't know her name, but he did know Kim Swan, whom he had picked up when he saw her driving drunk and weaving down a street. He said he hit her several times in the head to subdue her. When the police asked him if he knew anything about the disappearance of Vicki Elliott, a 21-year-old who went missing in September as she was walking to work at her midnight shift at the Ramada Inn, he said yes, he killed her too. She had accepted a ride, and when he tried to tie her up, she fought him off with a pair of scissors. That angered him, so he strangled her. He drew a map to direct the investigators where to find her body.
Wow.
His confession, when transcribed, ran 45 pages long.
Good grief.
And in addition to the murders, Long also solved a series of rapes that had occurred in the area over the past several years. He told police how he scanned papers for ads for items for sale, and in particular, he was looking for bedroom furniture, which Bobby Joe later explained was because one would have to try it out before they purchased it.
Sure.
He also went up to houses that had for sale signs and often forced his way in. A few times he raped girls as young as 12 or 13.
Jeez.
After he found an ad he liked, he would call and arrange to go look at an item during the day, and when the husbands were unlikely to be home, if he was mistaken, he could always decline to buy the item and walk away, like if he didn't want to do it.
Right.
And I'm assuming that if he gets there and he doesn't find the woman attractive or whatever, that's what he would do. More often, a woman alone answered the door and they would let him in because he came across as clean-cut, well-dressed, and respectable. He did not look like a rapist.
Right.
He practiced this maneuver in the neighborhoods in the counties surrounding Ocala, Miami, and Fort Lauderdale. When a woman opened the door and appeared to be alone and vulnerable, he would pull his knife out, and then he would bind the victims and rape them, often robbing the home before he left. Bobby Joe had actually written that, quote, a few of them got into it, end quote, and even asked him if he minded if they enjoyed it. He said that while he raped them, he made them talk to him, and most did not resist, but those who did received a punch in the stomach that showed them he meant business. Quote, give a bitch a choice between getting dicked and getting hurt, he said. You know what she's gonna pick.
Wow. Burn this guy. Jeez.
In his opinion, he was doing them a favor because they had such miserable sex lives with their husbands.
Oh, wow.
And he believed had he not begun to murder, he could have kept up with this criminal activity indefinitely, being the classified rapist.
Wow.
And he got a huge kick out of seeing himself described in the newspaper as the classified ad rapist or the ad man rapist. That was the other thing they called him.
Mm-hmm.
Although the police dated the first of these rapes to 1980, Bobby Joe claimed he had started using this method in 1975.
Wow.
And said, mostly I did it for the thrill of it. He especially liked the, quote, intimidation factor of his, quote, sharp, nasty blade, end quote. The FBI labeled him a power-assertive rapist, which meant that he was doing these crimes to affirm to himself that he was a man.
Here comes the X.
Here comes the X chromosome. I'm a man, so I'm going to be dominant. I'm going to rape.
Right.
The method was actually not quite as foolproof as he thought. He was nearly caught on several occasions as he fled the homes of these places where he's raping these women. But all in all, Bobby Joe appears to have raped at least 50 women, with some estimates going as high as 150 women.
Wow.
The investigators followed the map that Bobby Joe had provided them and discovered the 9th victim, Vicki Elliott. Her skeletal remains were found with a broken neck, and the scissors that she used to fight him off were found in what would have been the vaginal cavity. A positive identification was made from her dental records. They also found tiny red fibers that definitely linked her to Bobby Joe.
Right.
A missing person report of Virginia Johnson matched the description of the unknown victim, and a heart pendant found on her body was linked to her. The knife most likely used in the Michelle Sims murder was also discovered in Bobby Joe's apartment and was cataloged as evidence. And after a grand jury hearing, Bobby Joe was charged with 8 counts of murder and sexual battery and 9 counts of kidnapping, with 1 count of murder pending for Virginia Johnson, which was decided by Pasco County's grand jury.
Is that all?
He was also charged with violating his probation for aggravated assault, and because of the murder charges, he was refused bail. Then other bodies were found.
Wow.
On November 19th, 1984, a woman's corpse floated up in the Hillsborough River. She had been strangled with some type of a device. She was never identified, but she fit Bobby Joe's profile. On November 22nd, 1984, another woman's skeletal remains were found. She was identified as Artis Wick, and her remains were at least 6 to 7 months old.
Wow.
The first one he murdered was the last one found. Wow. Her hands were bound, and her death is attributed to Bobby Joe, even though he never confessed to the crime and he was never charged. After murdering these women, Bobby Joe would go home and sleep deeply. He apparently claimed that when he awoke, the entire incident seemed more like a dream than reality. He would then go to purchase a newspaper so he could read about it. Wow. And via the press, he learned more about each of his victims. He came to hate these women, believing that they were, quote, sluts, end quote, and that they deserved to die. He did not want to stop what he was doing. Finally, Bobby Joe's case is going to come to trial several times. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of it, but in 1985, Bobby Joe was tested and considered to be competent to stand trial. He admitted that he was aware of what he was doing and that it was wrong.
Right.
He showed careful control of his crimes. You know, he knew exactly what he was doing.
Sure.
And that's enough to be judged guilty rather than insane. That's sufficient to be judged guilty rather than insane.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing. He said he considered going to a doctor, but decided not to take the chance that he might be turned into the police. Duh.
Yeah.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing was wrong. And Bobby Joe's guilt is never really an issue, but the issue was, should he be executed or granted life in prison? That's what it's coming down to.
Right.
And a parade of mental health experts were brought into the case to try to prove that Bobby Joe's genetic anomalies and his head injuries accounted for his behavior. They also blamed his parents and too much pornography. No one is chaining him to the television set in 1984 because you weren't watching porn online. No one's chaining him to the television to watch porn.
It's like in American Pie when he's watching the screen of the TV that's all messed up.
Oh, yeah. And the mom comes in and it's just like the moaning and stuff. She's like bringing in the socks. Hey, honey.
Yeah, that was the 80s. Sorry.
Oh, Lord. Okay. By the time Florida is done with Bobby Joe Long, he had received 2 death sentences and 34 life sentences, many of which were reached in plea deals, plus an additional 693 years.
So you're saying there's a chance.
On April 23rd, 2019, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed Bobby Joe Long's death warrant.
There you go.
It was the first death warrant signed by DeSantis since he took office in January of 2019. Bobby Joe's subsequent appeals were denied, and he was executed by lethal injection on May 23rd, 2019, more than 30 years after his conviction.
Wow. Yeah, and this is a guy that he confessed to everything. And it took 30 years.
Yep.
Wow.
In the front row during the execution, Lisa McVeigh.
Yeah.
Quote, I wanted to be the first person he saw, end quote. Lisa McVeigh's experience led her to pursue a career in law enforcement.
Good for her.
She's also a motivational speaker. Lisa McVeigh has candidly recounted her experience as a victim of abuse even before her abduction. This is such an incredible story. Quote, I was being sexually abused at home. My grandmother's boyfriend used to put a gun to my head every time he molested me for 3 years. It was nothing new to me. One bad situation got me to another bad situation is what saved my life. Because the night before the abduction, I'm doing my suicide note.
Oh, wow.
And the next night, I'm fighting for my life.
Wow.
End quote.
Wow.
She had been forced by her drug and alcohol addicted mother to move in with and take care of her grandmother at age 14 because previously she had been in and out of foster care. So Lisa McVeigh is a Wonder Woman to begin with.
Right.
But the fact that the night before she's abducted, she's thinking of ending her life.
Sure.
Which is never the right thing.
Sure.
It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Right.
If you ever have feelings of suicide, reach out and speak to someone. But one night, that's what she's thinking, and the next night, she's trying to stay alive.
Right.
In 1994, Lisa McVeigh began working for the Hillsborough County Parks and Recreation Department. When she reported a break-in at the office, the deputy who came to the scene said, quote, you've got the attitude of a cop. You ever thought of being one?
As a matter of fact.
And in 1999, she was transferred to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office as a dispatcher and became a reserve deputy. She put herself through the police academy and was deputized in 2004. She works in the same department that found and arrested her captor, specializing in combating sex crimes and working to protect children.
Good for her.
Once again, Wonder Woman.
The good guy wins.
She also works as a middle school resource officer and uses her story to teach students how to handle potentially dangerous situations. Just amazing. One 17-year-old girl who didn't want to live, who didn't even want to live, took down a serial killer that police and FBI couldn't.
Right.
That is so powerful.
Yep.
That is so powerful. But that is the story of Bobby Joe Long. And that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitch to Homicide listeners. This is Chris Calvert. I love doing research and writing about real crimes, but I also love writing about fictional people who commit horrible atrocities. When you're ready to take a break from true crime for fictional crime, go to chriscalvert.com, where you'll find all my books, including some free ones to get you started. Jane Doe is one badass chick who quietly hunts terrorists in the United States. The Sex and Lies books are all FBI and CIA cases with a little romance on the side. And coming summer 2022, Book 10 in the series, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll, releases. You can find all of these books everywhere, and if you like to listen instead of read, you can find them all on Audible. So go grab a free book or take a listen. I love all the characters I've written. I've given them pain, ruined their lives, make them suffer, and maybe even throw in a heroic death. Or maybe they live to fight another day. Check it all out at chriscalvert.com, and thanks for being a listener of Hitched to Homicide.
Wow, so the rock star of this whole episode was the Lisa McVeigh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow, he got what he deserved.
Yeah, and like I said, I'll put a link to her book, even though I did not use it as a source, but I will put a link to her book in the show notes.
Sounds great. Okay, well, let's do something a little bit lighter. How about a little Bless Your Heart?
Well, bless your heart.
Dateline, Winter Park, Florida.
Oh, so the case was in Florida and the Bless Your Heart's in Florida too. Okay. We got a theme going here.
This one's a good one. Florida man glides to larceny in hover shoes. A thief snatched $550 worth of merchandise at a Winter Haven Walmart while zipping around on high-tech skates called hover shoes, according to police.
Hover shoes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Little Back to the Future action going on. Walmart security surveillance video released by police in Winter Haven in Polk County shows a man gliding through the store as he stole paint. This is the best part, a bouquet of flowers, and a Roku-equipped TV. Then he glided right out the store without paying. Zoom, 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 gone. Jeez. Quote, Back to the Future's McFly he's not, police posted on Facebook, but his hover shoes, Voyager's motokick, space shoes, or whatever you want to call them, makes him our first futuristic thief.
Oh, that's funny.
So he's got that going for him. After gliding out the door on what police think were, and if I'm mispronouncing this, correct me, Guy Roor electric shoes.
I bet, how do you spell it?
G-Y-R.
I bet it's Jai.
Gyroor.
Gyroor. He had on some special shoes. He had on gliding shoes.
He had some gliding shoes on. Let's forget about the name.
Magic shoes.
He's got some magic shoes. Magic legs. He then traded his Marty McFlys, which move up to 6 miles an hour. Yeah, pretty fast stuff. For a getaway Nissan Maxima, which moves up to 120 miles an hour. I didn't realize a Maxima could go 120 miles an hour. Despite the tongue-in-cheek Facebook posting, Winter Haven police say they are serious about bringing the shoplifter to justice, which means they haven't found this guy yet.
I don't know.
He's still skating around.
On his magic shoes, on his hover shoes.
Quote, we poke fun, but stealing is a crime and we want to get this guy and his shoes in custody. There's a photo we'll post on the In-Laws and Outlaws. I thought that was
a photo.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. The guy, he's got a stocking cap on and his flannel shirt and these big-ass shoes.
And he's got a television under one arm.
No, he's got a cart.
Oh, he's pushing a cart.
Oh, yeah. He's on all wheels.
You got to hand it. You got to hand it to him.
Yeah.
You got to hand it to him.
Yeah, if I was Walmart, I'd go, you know what?
We got to carry these. We need to get these in stock. If I was Walmart, that's what I would say.
Exactly. Except everybody be like buying them and stealing everything.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, if you have hover shoes or you have a Bless Your Heart that you'd like to send to us, you can send it to Chris@hitchtohomicide.com, or you can go to the website, hitchtohomicide.com. There's a little pull-down menu. You can suggest a case. You can send us a Bless Your Heart.
Right.
You can drop us a line.
Anything.
All of those things.
Yeah, just let us know what you're doing.
In your hover shoes.
Exactly.
That's all we have this week. That's my handsome husband over there.
And that's my beautiful bride on the other side.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.